Hey guys, it's Carolyn Gray, and lately I've been talking more about black hair care than I have about anything else. But one of the videos that keeps popping up when I go out to YouTube, it's usually something with Kevin Samuels. May he rest in peace. If you don't know him, it's this person that normally is talking to black women about their chances of finding love and, living happily ever after or whatever, or giving advice on how, they can find the relationship, I guess, of their dreams with black men. And so a lot of times, Kevin was right on point with so many of the lessons that he taught, but often I thought he was kind of hard and didn't really need to curse at the women the way that he did sometimes, and maybe called them bad names, although some people were delusional, like he said, but it left me wondering if there was a better way to share some of the messages that he was sharing. And also they're hard to hear when it's coming from a man. So I thought maybe a woman who is more mature, I am 58 and I've been married, it'll be 33 years in October, if you can believe that. And I met my husband back in the 80s in college. And the interesting thing is, I was raised in a single family home. My mother was divorced by the time I was 7 from my dad, and she was separated from him by the time I was 4 because he was abusive, was an alcoholic, didn't want to work, just you name it, and he was. So needless to say, my mom left him, and I was raised hearing that all men are no good. And so that was the mantra that I heard. And I saw women that were cheating on their husbands, and, knew of husbands that were cheating on their wives, and people having children, saying that one person was their father and really somebody else was their father. My mother would share all of this stuff with me. And so I was very, very jaded. But the funny thing is, being in the projects of Augusta, Georgia, trapped in the house while my mom worked, being an only child, never saw my dad. So I was stuck in the house, which left me reading and watching television. And so back in the 80s, in the 70s, I was watching things like The Waltons, Little House on the Prairie, and also my next door neighbor who used to dip snuff and drink beer at the same darn time, Mrs. Harley, God rest her soul, she read Harlequin romance books. And so during the summer when I was left home alone, my mom would have her check on me, and I wound up going over to her house. And so she would loan me books from her Harlequin romance collection. And so I would read those, and praise the Lord, it was back in the 70s, so the books were very tame. People didn't even have sex until they were married. So she wasn't being a bad influence in that regard. So I read those books, and I saw that people were, getting married, and they were living happily ever after. And I said, hey, that could be me, and I saw Carolyn Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie, married to Charles, who I heard was a dog in real life. But on the show, he was a loving husband, a loving father. And then Mrs. Walton was married to John, and they had their children, and he was, a good man. And so I was like, well, that could happen to me. If it could happen to them, why can't it happen to me? So that was where I got my dream, that I could find, that husband where I could build my own family and create a loving environment unlike what I grew up with. But like I said, I was raised to believe that all men were dogs and men were no good. And so if I hadn't had some of the other influences, I would have thought that finding love and getting married was an impossible dream. It is not. I'm here to tell you, like I said, almost 33 years later. So I met my husband in college back in the 80s, and it was a time where I wondered if I'd ever find love, because at the time, especially with a black man, and my mother didn't want me to bring anybody white home, because she grew up, in the time where white people weren't nice to Black people, especially living in the South, which is where I grew up, in Augusta, Georgia, and also North Augusta, South Carolina. So the funny thing is that I went off to school thinking I was going to find a husband because I grew up during the 70s and 80s. I was watching a lot of older movies from the 60s where they showed people in college, and what color were these people? The people that they showed in college were white, and it showed women, young women, going there to get their MRS degree. That's how I even learned the term. They were looking for husbands. And so because I saw, Gidget and Doris Day and different people in those settings, white women from the 60s, it made me say, oh, so when you go to college, you're supposed to get your degree, get your BS or whatever, but also your MRS. So I went to Clemson University looking for a BS and an MRS degree. And I was very disappointed for the first few years because unfortunately it was during the time of Prince, Purple Rain. So you had Apollonia, you had Vanity 6. These women were very light skinned. And so I was a brownie, as Oprah would call it. And so some of the guys who were even darker than I was thought I was too dark. And they were looking for someone that was light skinned. And or as a young friend told me, he was looking for a red bone. And so they didn't feel any shame telling you these things. It was very hurtful. And all of the football players that I saw were dating very light-skinned women, or they were dating white women. So I was like, what are my chances of finding someone? And so what happened? So one summer, I went home to Augusta, Georgia, and I'm going to make this part one. I wrote a letter to God and I told him what I was looking for. And I decided at 19 that I was looking for that MRS degree, and I wanted to only date people that were marriage material. But I needed to figure out what I wanted first. So that's where I'm going to stop the story. The fact that I had to be clear on what I was looking for. So this is the first line of defense, or the first action item that I want you to think about. If you are trying to find love, and especially even if you're looking for a Black man, for me, I wasn't looking for any particular race or color of man, but I'll tell you what I was looking for in the next conversation, because you have to be clear on what you want if you're looking for love, whether you're 19, in your 20s, or whether you're in your 40s. You got to be clear on what you want. So what I'll do in the next message, because I actually have some work that I have to get done, because my husband and I went out to dinner, and I didn't finish my work for the day. I work from home, which is why my kitchen table has my stuff still on it. But anyway, think about that until I come back. Be clear on what you want. And in the next message, I'll tell you what I wrote and told God that I wanted all those years ago, and how I actually got it. So stay tuned. I'll be back. The story is pretty interesting. And then I have some other tidbits and advice on how I landed the man of my dreams, and how I believe you might be able to too. So until then, have a good one. Bye.